do a quick mind map analysis of my decision to buy shares in Activision Blizzard, ticker symbol ATVI. For those of you from the podcast world, this video is actually available in podcast form. You can grab it on my on iTunes. Just do a search through my podcast at Sage Investors. So for every stock that I look at, there's always a series of questions that I ask myself that ultimately is going to lead me to a decision whether I want to buy or sell a stock. So I'm just going to walk you through the various questions that I do ask every time I look at a company that I'm considering wanting to invest in. So the first question I always ask myself when I'm looking at a company is, what do they do? What do they sell? What products and services do they sell? What's their value proposition? What makes them unique compared to other similar type businesses? So when we look at Activision, what do? Well, essentially what they do is they are a producer of video games. They're a video game company. And some of the more popular games or well-known games that they're known for are games like Call of Duty and World of Warcraft. When we think of video games, and video games I know of, the traditional way we think of it is the whole console thing. You know, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Wii's. So traditionally, these companies like Activision has marketed and sold or distributed their games through the traditional console format through DVDs. But it's changing now. Again, the technology has changed so much now that we're seeing now a transition of how these games are distributed from the console version to an online version, and which allows it to be distributed in a variety of platforms. You can play these games on your phone, you can play them on a tablet. The companies like Activision and other similar companies have been now transitioning and becoming more of an online portal for video games in terms of how they distribute it. The other area where they're also transitioning into, and this is kind of what got me interested in the company in the first place, in this whole kind of space, is this whole concept of esports. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a few seconds, but I just kind of want to put it out there, and that's, especially Activision, they've been a big participant in this whole development of esports. So I'll get into that in a second. So that's what they do. Activision, basically a video game company. They make video games. Competitors, who do they compete with? That's another key question. Is this a very competitive business, or is this just a couple of players that are kind of running the whole show? In the video game space, some of the main competitors for Activision are Electronic Arts. They make a lot of the sports games like the Madden sports, Tiger Woods golf and all that. There's Take-Two. Take-Two Interactive. They make the the Grand Theft Auto franchise. And then there's Tencent, which is very big in the mobile gaming space, especially in Asia. They're a big time player in that sense. So these are kind of the main players. There's other ones out there, but those are kind of the big ones that they're looking at. So when we're looking at video games, who plays these games? Like who buys video games? And the easy answer is to say it's young millennial people that'll kind of that are the ones that are going to gravitate toward it. That's the easy answer, but I think what's even more, you can take a step further, is people that are comfortable with connections, with connecting online. That is really the group, and that doesn't necessarily have to be millennials. It's just people who are more tech savvy, and there's a lot of people, Gen X, Gen Y, boomer side of it, that are also very more well connected into it. And this is where they play. Can be a big for companies like Activision. This is who they're playing towards. This is how they're transitioning now, as they're becoming more of that online kind of component. And the thing we got to ask ourselves when we identify the customers is, that's great, but are these type of customers going to come back? Are these customers going to consume video games over and over and over again? And the answer really is with the online format, it's creating a lot more incentives. And the way they've structured these games now, you kind of have to pay to play. If you want to go up higher levels, you got to kind of pay to get to higher levels. And the also other side of it is they're now becoming more subscription based. So instead of just buying, every time a version comes out, you just pay like an annual fee or a monthly fee, and you get access to the whole suite of games, almost like a kind of like a Netflix kind of approach. And so the beauty of it is it makes your cash flows more stable and more predictable, which is a good thing for investors. That's because that's what we want to invest in. We want to invest in companies that have very stable, predictable cash flows. So the question is, these are the people who buy these games. Will they come back over and over again? And from what we can see is the answer is yes, they will come back and they will buy games over and over again. So as I said, the online format is a big transition now for a lot of these companies. But the other area now that that we're seeing, and Activision is a big time player at, is this whole esports side of it. And this is becoming a thing. I didn't think it was such a concept, but there are a huge amount of people that watch people play video games. The industry is just exploded, and I'm just going to throw some quick numbers. This is what really got me interested in the company, in the space, and specifically looking at Activision and some other companies, is when you look at the space, that space is expected to generate $1 billion in sales in 2018. There is estimated 380 million people watch people play video games, watch esports. And that's basically what it is. It's just like leagues. There's just leagues of people, like competitive leagues, tournaments, where people play each other, and at the end of the day, whoever wins the tournament wins a whole potload of money. And these aren't like serious, we're talking serious prize money here. These aren't like little $25 things here. There's serious payoffs here, and it's bringing a lot of people into the space. Who's watching this? 380 million people use it. It's estimated that the audience is 3 times greater than what would watch watching Major League Baseball games. In Asia, this esports thing is huge. It's a huge following over there. It's estimated like the audience space for esport game is 5 times bigger than Netflix, the Netflix subscriber base. And as I said, there's a lot of people, there's a big audience for it, and it's so much so that companies like Amazon, they went out and bought a company called Twitch, which basically streams esports, streams all kinds of tournaments. And so this is a big deal. There's a lot of stuff going on in this space. And so bringing this back to Activision, they're a big time player in this whole space, in the sense that they've created actual like gaming leagues. And one of the big ones out there is this Overwatch. You'll hear this term Overwatch, which has a huge following. It's a big tournament, it's a big league, and there's different teams that are being playing. I'll get into the team side of it, but it's a huge, they call it the Overwatch League. Huge audience participation, and it's so big enough that it actually, just before I even jumped on here, I just found out that ESPN is actually taking over and going to be streaming and showing all their all the Overwatch League coverage on ESPN. So that's a big deal from that side. It's almost kind of mainstreaming the whole concept of esports. And obviously, if ESPN's taking a look at esports, it can tell that this concept's starting to get a lot more legitimate from that side of it. So again, video game company growing more into the online side of it, targeting a very young core group of people, a connected group of people that are more and more getting more engaged in this type of format, or more so even at the expense of like traditional professional sports leagues. A lot of people are saying esports might actually rival some of the professional sports leagues in North America, if not in the world. So interesting space, interesting concept, interesting business model that's clearly getting traction. But the question we have to ask ourselves as investors is, does this company actually make money? Seems like a really cool idea, seems like a really cool model, but is this profitable? Can investors make money out of this? And so a lot of times when I'm starting to look at a company's profitability and financial performance, I start looking at a couple of metrics. And the most one I kind of go to is economic profit, which takes difference between the company's return on invested capital and compares it to the company's cost of capital. And a company that's generating high returns on invested capital that are greater than the cost of capital are creating tangible wealth. And ultimately, stock prices trade at a premium for those type of companies. So when I looked at Activision, their returns on invested capital came in between 17 and 23%. And that's basically on a goodwill adjusted basis. If you were to take out the goodwill, their returns on invested capital then skyrocket to between 73 and 89%. And when you compare it to the company's cost of capital, which is about 10 to 11%, this company is creating significant cash flow and is creating significant tangible wealth for its shareholders. Just to build on top of that, adding to this whole, on top of this esports platform, as I said earlier, this Activision was a creator of this league, this esports league called the Overwatch League, and they did something really unique in that they created this league of 12 teams. And basically, if you wanted to create a league to enter this Overwatch, you had to pay $20 million to buy in. And you'd think, like, who's going to pay $20 million to buy, like, a video game, virtual video game team? But apparently there's a lot, because they managed to create, they managed to get 12 teams. And one of those teams is actually owned by the owner of the New England Patriots, Robert Kraft, who obviously knows a thing or two about running businesses. So if he's getting into this, he must be seeing some potential in here. So that's like 12 teams at about $20 million. So the company has Activision's basically pocketed over $250 million on this sports league, that they created. They're looking to expand to 32 teams. So if that's another 20 teams times $20 million, at least, that's probably another $400 million in revenue coming into the company. So this is a huge growth area. This is this is like a very hyper growth space this whole thing is right now. So when I look at Activision, I don't look at Activision as just strictly the video game producing company. This is almost like a league. This is like an NFL, NBA, NHL kind of thing, potential that this league that they're trying to create with it. So that I found that's kind of what got me interested into it. As I said, they're transitioning away from the traditional console model to a more subscription-based model, and they're at the point now where 30% of their revenues are coming in from mobile, and it's growing even higher, and it's even growing. It's growing, and it's growing pretty damn fast. So clearly, this company is creating tangible. It's creating profit. It's creating wealth. So as an investor, that's what I want to see. The next thing I want to take a look at is the financial strength of this company. Is this company's financial position healthy? Is it strong, or is it in a weak death spiral kind of thing? So when I look at a company's financial position, it's all about the company's balance sheet. And so there's three components I tend to focus in on. One is the liquidity. The second is their debt position, and the third is the quality of the company's assets. So when I looked at the company's liquidity, I look at their current assets to current liabilities, or the current ratio, and right now it's greater than 1. The ratio is greater than 1, so the company seems to have more than enough current assets to sustain itself on a short-term, day-to-day kind of basis. So from a liquidity perspective, it looks okay. They have right now their cash position. They have just enough amount of cash to cover their long-term debts. They have about 4.7 billion in cash versus 4.3 billion in debt. So they have more than enough. If they wanted to retire all their debt tomorrow, they have more than enough money that they can do that. From a debt perspective, one of the ratios I tend to go to is the debt equity ratio. And right now it's under 0.5, which means from that perspective, you want the lower the better. And so the company seems to have, its debt position seems to be manageable at this point, because they are generating so much cash flow that they can cover the debt off of it. The third area, as I talked about, that I want to look at is the quality of the company of assets. How much percentage does their intangibles. Does the company have any intangible assets like goodwill or patents or brands or type of intangible value assets? And what is the percentage of it compared to the total amount of assets? Now with Activision, their percentage of goodwill and intangibles came in at 60% of total assets, which is really high. I look usually for companies that have that around under 20%. To me is a manageable amount. So 60% is pretty high. And so that's a little bit concerning when I want to look at the overall financial position of the company. So that's one thing that I kind of jumped out at me. The next thing we want to do is, okay, we're looking at the company as it is right now, but it's also important as investors that we understand the risks of investing with this company. What are the risks associated with the business? Like what could take this business down a few notches? What threats are out there in the horizon that could potentially impair this ability, impair the company's ability? Well, one risk that I thought of was when I think about this whole video game concept, the esports concept, it has a very faddish feel to it, in that I just wonder if this is kind of like a short-term, is this a short-term trend, or is this something that has legs and is going to has a long sustainability to it? It kind of reminds me of the whole poker. Like you remember a few years ago, whole poker was nothing, and then all of a sudden these poker leagues showed up, and World Series of Poker, and the World Poker Tour, and all that stuff. It kind of has like shades of that kind of feel to it. And so, there was a real crazy period for poker, but it's kind of really plateaued and really mellowed out since then. So I wonder if this is how sustainable this is. That could be a potential risk. The other is it's a very hit-driven business, in that you're really driven by your successes, and especially in video games, the more popular video games you have, the bigger your franchise could be and more sustainable of it. So one of the risks potentially is right now they've got a few games that are quite popular, and Call of Duty and this whole Overwatch League is really thriving right now, but you're only good as your most recent hit. And so one of the things I wonder is, how sustainable, I would think it's really hard to be able to crank out video games that are going to be popular with the masses on a consistent and long-term basis. So, you're only as good as your last game is definitely in play when you kind of look at the whole video game space, and when I kind of look at Activision with really only a handful of really popular games. Granted, they're super duper popular, but is it sustainable? Is that a potential risk? Just like, fashion and movies, like you're only as good as your last success, right? And then the other thing that's potentially going to be a risk is this is driven by disposable income, and so there's economic sensitivities here. If the economy goes into a recession, people have less money, they're not, you prioritize what you're going to spend your money on, and is video games kind of at the top of people's list? That's a potential risk that the company could face. Right now things are going great, and so people are willing to put money down, buy subscriptions. Is it sustainable? And that's the kind of question you kind of have to wrap your head around when you're looking at this stock. So far, we've got a good concept, video games. It's pretty competitive. It's definitely creating a lot of wealth. It's in a space that's growing really, really fast. It's got a core group of people that are really into it and seem to be very loyal to it. It seems to be like a lot of good things here. There are risks associated with it. You kind of have to balance it out. But the question is, if I'm interested in buying the stock, is it worth buying right now? Is the stock cheap? And so right now, based on a couple of factors, it looks pretty expensive. On a relative basis, it's trading at about, Activision stock is trading at about 25 times its forward earnings. future earnings. On a discounted cash flow basis, the valuations that I've seen on the stock come in between 55 and 69 per share. The stock right now is trading at like $81, so it's definitely expensive. It's definitely overpriced. So based on that, at first glance, I thought, yeah, I don't think I want to get into it. This is like a really one of those kind of momentum stock. It has that whole momentum stock feel, and the stock has really popped in the last year or so. So at first glance, I said to myself, you know what, I think I'm going to pass on it. But I just kept getting drawn back into this whole potential here of what's going on with this whole esports thing. And the fact of the matter is as Activision has really, the fact that they've been able to get 12 teams or 12 people to drop $20 million onto this league and potentially have enough people to expand to 32 means there's a critical mass of people out there that are into this right now and are willing to spend money to get into this space. And so this is making it really hard for me to kind of just ignore. And so when I factor that in, the fact that it is creating tangible wealth, the balance sheet seems pretty solid, but this kind of the percentage of goodwill does concern me. But the fact of the matter is it is producing cash, and it's attracting a group of people that I think would be very loyal to this space. It kind of made me want to say, you know what? I think maybe I might want to just kind of dip my toe into it. So ultimately what I did was, what I've decided to do was I decided to buy in. I bought in, but I bought a small amount, and I'm probably going to like average, if the stock were to fall down, just crap out a bit, I would probably average down a little bit. But I definitely have a strong exit strategy. If the stock went down 20%, I would get out of it. So it's a very speculative kind of buy because of the valuation. But so I said, you know what, I'll buy a small position, and I'll see how it goes. And again, there's a lot of really good things going on in this space. And to me, Activision seems to be like one of the kind of market leaders in that, and especially when it comes to this whole esports time, they seem to be like they're going to be one of the big players for this kind of space going on. And the fact of the matter is that ESPN is actually getting into this and are willing to broadcast now their Overwatch League. Kind of, to me, is almost like a positive game changer moment for the whole esports kind of almost like legitimizes the whole thing. So there you go. That's my analysis and my take on Activision Blizzard. If you want more information on other companies that I do this similar type of analysis, or more information on the courses that I teach, where I kind of integrate this whole concept, this whole framework in terms of how you evaluate stocks, you can check me out on my website, sageinvestors.ca. You can check out my podcast, Stock Talk, which you can get through my website, sageinvestors.ca, or through iTunes. Thanks again for listening in. This is Amin Reina from Sage Investors, and we'll catch you again another time. Cheers.